try that. Alright, cool. Hey everybody, welcome to Vibe Unit. This is session 42. Doing something a little bit different today. There's nobody here today except for myself, which is actually kind of funny because 42, this is session 42. Um, and 42 is actually my very favorite number there is, period. So I guess it's somewhat poetic. Um, so some of the things I want to kind of do today is talk about kind of like the philosophy of Vibe Unit, kind of like what we're really trying to accomplish here, or what the purpose of this is, and then maybe a little bit of like how we got here and what was some of the inspiration behind really kind of how this whole thing got started. So I'm gonna pull up some information here, and I've got some diagrams that I want to show as well. So give me just a second. I'm trying to find the pieces I need here. Um, so yeah, if you're just joining us, welcome. I'm going to try to keep an eye on chat here. So if anybody wants to has anything to contribute or has any questions they want to ask, I will be monitoring that for the duration of the stream today. So um, let me see. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. Good. So I think before I get into kind of the real story behind all of this, I want to kind of ask a couple of questions that are more dealing with like a conceptual idea more than like a concrete thing. Um, and those are this, which is what makes a show memorable. Um, I recently was thinking about this, and having attended many concerts myself, there's certain, you go to many of them after a while, and they kind of blend together because I feel like that energy that is there when live music is happening is something that is almost universal, like from show to show. But there's certain things that really make them stand out. Like there's just certain shows that, like an event happened, or something was played, or something was heard, or something was learned. Whatever the case may be, um, I'm curious what you all think is the thing for you that makes a show memorable. And for me, I think a big one is like, say, like lighting that really connects with what's being played, because that kind of marriage of visuals and audio is something that can evoke, I think, stronger emotions than just the music itself could. Um, so just to give you an idea, I it's pretty open ended. I'm just really kind of curious. what things stand out to others in terms of what makes for a memorable experience, and of course on the heels of that, what elements contribute most heavily to those memories. Um, so yeah, while you think about that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Vibe Unit actually is. I would say that we are an incubator for musicians, and the production inclined is probably the best way to explain it. So, um, the goal here is to provide a space for musicians to spend time together, working out ideas, or just finding whatever that feeling is that you get when you play with other people. Um, and at the end of the day, that isn't the only thing it's there for. Because at the end of the day, the sort of infrastructure that it takes to provide that also is conducive to doing recording and trying to finish some of the various projects that I've started over the years, and Mike as well. And you've seen Mike on Vibe Unit pretty much since day one. He's been here for every session, and this is kind of a project that he and I primarily started, somewhat to give us an excuse and outlet for working out our own ideas, but also, like I said, to provide that to others as well. Um, we started on the 1st of January this year, 2021. Um, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are 42 sessions in as of today. So, kind of getting to the end of the year here. It's very interesting to see a year in where we're at. We've had 13 different musicians through. And it's just been a pleasure. Everything about it, honestly. The roots of this kind of might be interesting to some, and that's kind of what I'm really interested in explaining today. The real roots of this kind of started in conversations between myself and a close friend in, I want to say 2009, either late '08 or early 9. And we were talking about how cool it would be if there was a venue that both catered to kind of the live entertainment thing, but also had the capability to record shows or help artists develop, like, for example, recording a demo or maybe a live video, that sort of thing. And we talked about that for years. And of course, like at this time, we had just kind of gotten out of high school, and it was like kind of just pipe dream stuff. Like, what would be the coolest thing we could do or be involved in? And kind of came to the conclusion that other people or organizations, businesses, whatever, were filling the live entertainment space. And then on top of that, recording was becoming accessible enough for almost anyone to learn and get reasonable results. So the advent of digital audio workstations and the interfaces that are required to actually get sound into the computer, the cost of those came down drastically, as did the cost of the software as well. So it got to a point where it's like, if you're willing to spend maybe a couple of $100s, you could start recording. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get good results necessarily, but the fact that anybody could start and try getting involved in the learning process itself and just kind of give it a shot for themselves. One of my favorite folks kind of in the audio world is a guy named Andrew Sheps. And one of the concepts that has come out frequently in the various interviews and things that I've seen with him is he says it doesn't really matter except for what comes out of the speakers. And that's always resonated with me, that, no one's ever going to get to like pick apart your process in most cases. You're sitting in a bedroom trying to, finish a song you wrote or something. No one's going to get to know what that vocal sounded like soloed. And so it doesn't matter. If the whole package sounds the way you want and it sounds good, then it is right. And I really truly believe that. So the financial outlay required to get a venue off the ground didn't make any sense at that time, because there was already places to do it, and the financial cost of getting into recording was low enough that it didn't seem like that was so much of a boon, unless there was really like some sort of cutting edge thing, or some other really attractive thing about it that was something beyond, oh, we can record your thing. And that was what we always got stuck on. And this is honestly the saddest part. Getting into this part is difficult for me, because this has been hard to watch for me personally. But over the years, I feel like, at least in this area, we're in the Southwest Michigan area, for those of you who aren't familiar, and we, over the last, I'd say, 10 years, I mean, if you want to say from the time that my friend Nick and I started discussing this, we've lost most of the live music venues in our area, um, at least ones that are like really set up for a killer production. Um, Events that used to come around in the summer and include live music or performance kind of stuff. Like I'm thinking of things like Venetian Festival, which I'm not trying to get into the depths of why that was or wasn't a good idea or why it ended, but that was definitely something that brought live entertainment on like a, what I say, like a regular basis. You know, every summer that was going to come through, and there would be concerts and bands playing, etc. Um, Bunch of local venues have closed their doors either because the business itself failed or they didn't want to deal with the scene or promoters, or the people that they were involved in with business didn't have the kind of the vision to get anything done, or just weren't honest folks. um, which, I mean, if you're not going to be honest with people, I don't think you can get super super far, um, with that sort of thing, especially when, I mean, it's a low margin thing. Let's be honest. I mean, it's not like venues are just crushing and rolling in the money. There's a lot of costs, and I think that it can be kind of cutthroat if your livelihood depends on that, and uh, in a sense, like somebody's kind of playing with your money, um, and that's happened definitely. I can think of a couple instances of that in specific. Another addition to the whole situation that I think is involved in this is a series of bad attempts by other folks that have tried to kind of like revive the scene, but for their own benefit or for like control over people or their money. It just seems to have left a bad taste in the mouth for people who would be maybe willing to try to spark the fire again. Um, and in the case of a couple of places I can think of, one in particular, like they literally got rid of all of their stuff. They don't have uh, a sound system, they don't have lights, they don't have a stage, and they used to have these things. This isn't a big venue, but again, it's just a place that live music could happen. Um, so that's kind of like what has driven the initial start of all of this. I think it was kind of a realization of all these things being true, and that being a common feeling between Mike and I, feeling like it'd be really cool if there was a way that we could get the live experience in terms of playing and listening and being involved in things, but not be tied to these sort of whims. Which right there, that's the reason that we're in a basement. We're literally in my house, doing this because the rent's already paid, right? So we're just trying to do what we can with what we have. Um, and so that leads, speaking of Mike, Mike's my partner in crime in this whole thing. Oh, hello, kitten. Hi, kitty. You gonna say hello to the world? Hi. Say hello, kitty. So, Vibe Unit is managed by Mike and myself, with help and input from others. I tend to make the high level technical decisions, and kind of came up with the flow for how we're actually getting this production to happen every Sunday. But Mike has the same capabilities. I just have kind of taken the point on that. Um, and we both have a real desire for consistency. We like things to be the same. We like things to be something that people can count on, that has a solid um, production value, that has a certain expectation along with it. And we're still coming into that, to be honest. Listening to some of our early sessions, like listening to our January 1st session, which is the first one we ever did, is kind of rough now. It's almost hard to listen to, um, just because we've come so far, and it's really cool to see that progress. And while that wasn't something that we had in mind when we started this, even just being able to see what has happened for us individually throughout this time has been really rewarding. Um, we're supporting this basically by our personal resources. So we haven't solicited any kind of outside support. We we do have like PayPal and a Patreon. We would love to have regular support in this, but Our total ongoing costs are low. We've acquired basically everything we have in our seed resources personally, so we don't have any debt um, or anything like that. So maybe in the future, as this grows into something different and more folks maybe want to be involved, that may change. But at this point, we don't have any. I don't need to make a money ask of you every week, and that's something that's really, really important to me. Um, so keeping our costs very low has been important to not having to be the another place that's begging for your subscription and your money and that sort of thing. I really do believe that music should be enjoyed without there being an exchange of currency or like resources for that to happen. I think that supporting the arts is very, very important, but I also think that um, money itself shouldn't be like the barrier to entry, right? Like you shouldn't be kept out of a show because you can't pay, if that makes sense. Um, Obviously, that brings interesting things into the equation, like how do you prove that this is something that you can't afford? Well, in a perfect world, I'd like to believe that people who really do believe in and are patrons of the arts are kind of the support for this. But maybe I'm just a crazy guy for thinking that way in the world we actually live in. But we're doing well, and even just with the kind of the core team, Ashley's absolutely invaluable as well. She's responsible for everything you see in terms of visual production. So if anything you like that you see, she could be directly attributed to for that. So um, our choices in camera shots and how things are presented, she's running all of our graphics, running the video switcher, running all the production gear. Uh, Pretty much everything it takes that isn't out in the room that you see is happening because of that. So our core team is kind of 3 people. I would say the minimum crew is kind of 2, which is really just an operator each for audio world is what we call it, and video world, which is what it takes to broadcast. So an ideal setup would be someone to mix audio, like an A1 mixer, and a technical director, someone to kind of call the shots, and someone to operate the switcher. And some of those things can be combined, but we don't have any sort of manned camera positions or anything like that, so there's no camera operators at this time. We pretty much just use fixed shots. Um, so I'd also like to get into a little bit, and this is kind of catered more to those that maybe are more technically minded or are just kind of curious how, on a physical level, all this comes together. So we can talk a little bit about, I think, kind of the equipment we're using and how we're taking advantage of it to present what we're doing here. So one of the key pieces of that was the effectively donation of a large format analog mix console. So a place that a friend of mine was managing had upgraded to a bunch of digital equipment and had a large format mixer they were looking to let go. And at the time that I requested it or made it known that I was interested in it, that was before we had even started doing this or even really had the idea that it was the plan. So it kind of, when we came up with the idea for Vibe Unit and really were kind of committing to what we kind of wanted it to be, we knew that this mixer was available, and I just had it in storage. So we kind of realized, hey, that kind of takes care of our biggest problem, which is how do we deal with the number of inputs that we want to deal with. So, because we wanted to mic a full drum kit, we wanted to be able to dedicate at least 8 to 12 channels for that. For recording purposes, we wanted to be able to mic guitars, guitar cabinets more specifically. Another key philosophy piece of this was we wanted every participant in this to be a part of whatever discussion was going on, because it was very important to us that the viewer is involved in that piece, right? So that if we're discussing an idea or trying to make a decision about where we're going to go with an idea, that the viewer watching would feel like they were a part of that conversation, or maybe in a certain sense involved in that decision-making process. So you figure a mic for every position for vocals or talk-back purposes, every instrument, drums, room mics, talk mics for video operator, board operator, etc. It ends up being quite a few channels. So the board that we have is an Allen and Heath GL2800. We have the 48 channel version, so it's got the extra sidecar on it, and we're using that for bringing in all our input sources. So everything hits analog gear all the way up until the point that we convert it to digital for the purpose of broadcast. And originally we were kind of wanted to be purists about this because, interestingly, one of the things we wanted to do early on in this was get an old tape machine and experiment with doing tape-based recording. But the cost and complexity of that kind of made it fall by the wayside. I'm still a little bit interested in it just because I grew up and got into this when tape was basically on the way out. Other than like for aesthetic or sonic purposes, it wasn't the primary workflow for most of that point. So I didn't learn any of that at all, really. I mean, I have some familiarity with it, but I wasn't exposed to it. So I still have a little bit of an interest in seeing how that workflow works and seeing how folks used to have to do it. It's very interesting to me. But that being said, as we realized broadcast was kind of the other context we were interested in covering, in addition to the first context, which is the monitoring for the folks in the room, it seemed just like the perfect fit because it's got tons of matrices and sends and EQ on every channel, subgrouping, pretty much anything you'd want. It's technically not a recording board, but we make it work. It actually works really, really well for us. So we use that to bring in all our inputs. We try to apply correct gain structure, light EQ where it's needed. We process some channels with outboard analog equipment as well. We use tools like compressors, equalizers, limiters. We mix two contexts, as I mentioned before. One is for broadcast and one's for the house. So the house mix in a typical live scenario would be what the audience is hearing, right? We do something a little different here where what would normally be kind of your PA mix is actually what is mixed for the purpose of the viewer. And then we have a second mix that's basically a matrix mix, if you're familiar with that, that includes that and certain other mix plus elements, and that's how we'd get our monitoring circuits for our musicians. So effectively, when we're here, we're all listening to the same thing you're listening to, but maybe with some different things pushed up a little bit for the purpose of just being able to hear them better. The context we're going for broadcast is intended to be more of a balanced kind of recording that you'd expect to hear. So the house mix feeds monitoring and a reference recording, and the broadcast mix feeds our program recording and the broadcast stream itself. So we have 48 channels of input, 8 auxes, 4 matrix outs, 8 subgroup outs. We have direct outs on every channel, which is also what we use to get our recording sources. The board is routed in such a way that everything mixes down to groups. So we group down to drums, instruments, vocals, and effects in stereo pairs, which are panned and summed to a two-bus mix for distribution. So that's our main like two-bus mix. We strap a VCA compressor on that before broadcast with pretty relaxed settings just for mix glue. I like the sound of VCA compressors, like something in the I guess pedigree or whatever or lineage of like an API 2500 or something to that effect. I don't like those to do a whole lot, but they just really kind of glue everything together. We aim for no more than 2 dB reduction from this device. It's literally just for glue. And then after that, we send the house mix into the two contexts that I mentioned, our monitoring and headphones. And then the broadcast mix goes to the video world. So, and then there we also have a peak limiter where we just limit everything to -1 dB, which keeps our levels proper for all the streaming services. And then of course we hit analog to digital conversion right before the video switch. So I want to just show you real quick if I can. I have let me see if I can do this. Let me go back here and turn this on. Alright, so I'm actually going to put this on top of me and just kind of drive around in it with you here for a second. This is maybe a weird way to present it, but I'm by myself today and trying to just do what I can. So let me just bring this in. So what I've got here is kind of an overview of the system. And actually, let me make this a little bit smaller here. Alright, so what we got here is kind of our system overview according to what I had mentioned previously, right? So we're running, I can zoom this up a little bit for us. We have two snakes on the floor that you've probably seen in videos. So each of those are providing 12 channels of send back to the board. So we bring those all into the Allen and Heath GL2800. And then some of the channels, like I mentioned, have like a comp or a limiter on them. We use a 3632 pretty extensively for VCA duties. And then we convert to digital for a recording, which goes to our iMac. And then we also have another output that we use that goes right into our video switcher and then is combined with all of our other stuff and goes out to the world. So this is, I'm probably going to post this up again. I put up this diagram a decent while ago as like a post on our social media. So there's a bunch of things going on here that maybe seems complex, but really isn't at the end of the day. I'm going to do something here real quick. There we go. So there's definitely room for growth, but that's kind of how we're dealing with what we have at the moment. So the other thing I wanted to kind of get into, let me check real quick, see if we have any sort of questions that need answering. Doesn't look like we have anything, which is fine. So, okay, so another thing I wanted to mention just very quickly in case anyone's curious, as far as the equipment we're using, if you want more detailed information, we don't actually have this posted anywhere, but I will just briefly go over it. We like to use, we use Shure microphones all around. We really just kind of believe in what they do and have done for so many years at this point. We just haven't had any issues whatsoever with Shure gear. We also use a couple of their devices for processing, specifically some DFAs that we're using for EQ purposes. We're using, of course, like I said, Allen and Heath for our main mixing. We use Focusrite for our analog to digital conversion and vice versa. We're using DBX for compressors and limiters. We have some Alesis gear in the mix as well. Like I said previously, we're using a 3632 for VCA duties. We're using some various old reverb and delay units that we picked up from various places. Some of them are kind of vintage and strange sounding, but in our context, it works great. We're using, let's see, what else are we using? Well, of course, Macintosh computers are being used for everything. Everything's Apple here. The only thing that is not currently Apple is our video switcher. We've found that we run OBS Studio for all of our broadcast stuff, and we've just found, having played around with a lot of different stuff, there's really no, until you start getting into hardware encoders and spending a whole lot of money, excuse me, there really isn't a whole lot better that I've been able to find. There are other options that I've seen people use, like vMix, etc., but I personally am just not a fan of those solutions. But anyways, so that is currently running on a Windows-based computer. We've also found another thing about that is that that seems to be the only way to get, if you have a GPU that you're required to use for encoding or acceleration, um, that does not seem to be well supported on any operating system but Windows, unfortunately. So for the foreseeable future, we're stuck with that. Um, but other than that, everything is Macintosh equipment. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's really involved in this. Oh, we extensively use a technology called NDI, um, which is something that allows you to put both audio and high definition video over standard TCP/IP networks. So we use that for basically shuffling video all around the house and getting audio everywhere it needs to go once it's been converted to digital. We use that for camera feeds. We use that for getting video between our switcher and our broadcast machines, different things like that. We use it for screen capture, for graphics, just a number of different tasks. So that's kind of an important piece that we kind of couldn't do this without, I think, without having to spend a lot more money on hardware. I personally come from a computer kind of IT, programming, networking, all that kind of thing background, so it all kind of comes easy to me. As soon as it's something that's network based, I feel like I know something about it and can make it work, and that's kind of been the case here. And NDI is a key piece of that. We are also using an interesting piece of software I recommend if any of you are familiar, interested in this, and are trying to get into streaming. Really have a look at a piece of software called Companion, and I want to say it's made by someone called Bitfocus AG, I believe. That's basically like a tool for creating control surfaces that can control a bunch of different things. So we've basically boiled down the operation of the switcher, the graphics, various other elements of the production are basically we just create button map layouts. So it's just a way for us to control every piece of our production system from basically a phone or a tablet or anything that's in the building and on our production network. That's been very useful as well to kind of keep production values high and not have a lot of surprises. You know, you press buttons and they do what you expect they will, the way you set them up. Trying to think if there's any other really major pieces. Oh, might be interesting to some of you. Most of our fixed camera shots are actually done with GoPros. On the correct firmware, GoPro, starting with a Hero 3 Plus, can output high definition 1080 video at 30 frames per second. And the Plus can do 1080 at 60. The Hero 3 can only do 30 frames per second. So if you're considering how you can get into a reasonable streaming setup on a budget, you can eBay GoPros for sometimes under $100 that have these capabilities. They require a cheap, $3-4 adapter to get clean HDMI out of them, and we've relied on those pretty extensively to do what we're doing here as well, just as a low-cost camera that can be set to manual settings, and it's kind of set and forget once you get the color set flat and the correct processing applied. The cameras kind of look really fisheye on their default settings, but there's a mode called narrow, I believe it's called, where it does some post-processing to remove some of that fisheyeing effect. I don't know if that's a crop frame thing or exactly what it's doing, but we use that to try to get rid of some of the weird curve at the end of edge of the image that you might see. But the pro of this, in my mind, is that it just gives us a really wide shot that includes all of the action. And again, like I mentioned previously, we don't have any camera operators that are actually operating, a shot specifically. So it's pretty key to try to be able to include as much of the action as possible in just shots that are stuck to a wall or hung from a ceiling or whatever spot that we have found that works. So that's kind of how we're doing it. Really, all this is being done with fairly low-cost stuff. And maybe that's the piece I'm the most proud of, in a certain sense, that I kind of wondered if we could get it all done. And it didn't start this clean, but we've managed to get it to a place that at least it works and we can come in every week and not have a whole lot of surprises. And any of you that know me personally know I love surprises. Uh, um, so yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to cover in terms of what we're using for gear, a little bit of how it's connected. I feel like I said, if you're real technically inclined, you want to see it or play with it, just come over. There's a spot for you to just mess around with stuff. Um, the goal of this is to provide that as well. You know, a place to kind of experiment with technique or ideas that you maybe wouldn't try somewhere else. Um, we're just we're interested in the experiment of this more than anything, I think. So, I also need to mention as well that while we do use all those companies' products that I mentioned, we are not sponsored by anybody. So, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, we don't have any sort of like revenue coming in from that. We're not being like given equipment or anything like that. This is all what we've managed to put together ourselves. Um, that being said, that might be something worth exploring. You know, if there's some sort of marketing angle to this, but time will tell. We're just trying to be consistent and make sure we do what we have agreed to do every week, and see where it goes. If you were a part of our stream last week, or maybe it was the week before, Mike and I kind of gave a little bit of a clue as to where we're thinking about heading with this in the future. And I think a key piece that we've identified in speaking to many people about this is that there's a little bit of anxiety maybe that comes from uh, being watched or like having people observe what you're doing, especially if you're just kind of messing around. So something that I would like to see happen, I think, this is still obviously wide open for anybody who wants to come through that has their own music that they would like to present and play for others. That being said, it is also going to shift, I think, this next year into something that is focused more on weeks where there is no scheduled artist or group coming through to play. I think Mike and I are going to use it to try to finish up some of our own stuff that we've been working on for a really long time. We each have a little collection of songs that we think is meant to be together, and we would like to kind of develop those. Um, I don't know if I think we may have worked on a couple of these songs at some point in Vibe Unit in various sessions, but you'll see more of those when we get into them. The experimental side, I think, that involves Mike and I just exploring various sounds and kind of doing improvising and looping and that sort of thing. We've kind of shifted that a little bit out into a channel that Mike has started called Skylight Huddle, which we do from his studio, and that's been very fun, more on the exploratory side because his space that he has set up is more catered towards hardware. So um, we have loopers, synthesizers, like all just pretty much anything you can imagine is over there in terms of instruments, which lends itself to that sort of creativity really, really well. Um, so we've had a lot of fun. I wish I could remember how many sessions that has been at this point, but quite a few now, and kind of really coming into a stride with that as well. I noticed that when Mike and I kind of improvise at Vibe Unit, and if we're wrong about this, I'd love to hear about it, but it seems like a lot of times we just kind of fall into the same stuff, and I think that's because we're very comfortable with each other musically, and the equipment and the setup we have here is very conducive to a certain thing, and we just kind of fall into it very easily and naturally. And where at his house, I feel like 20. Okay, so Mike just commented 21 sessions in on Skylight Huddle. So beautiful. I appreciate that. So 21 sessions in, we're kind of at a point where, um, like I said, it's kind of hit a stride and has become a place where we maybe mess with things we wouldn't normally. And I feel like I'm not saying we're scared to do that here, but we again, like I said, we have this kind of overarching idea of um, what sounds good and what's just good production values. And as soon as kind of something starts sounding the way we want, it's like, oh, let's just stay there. And it makes us not very adventurous, I think, over here. Whereas at Skylight Huddle, I feel like there isn't really any sort of like I say, there's no rules. It's not anarchy, but at the same time, it's really intended to just try it, and we're okay with trying things that don't work and then trying something else. So if you're not already subscribed to that or haven't already joined us in that, please go on YouTube and search for Skylight Huddle and subscribe. Um, it's really been a fun thing for us to do, and it'd be awesome to have you join us and see what we're up to. Just trying to think here if there's anything else that I wanted to cover today. Maybe a little bit shorter stream probably today. We've only been live for maybe 40 minutes, but I just wanted to go over some of these things I feel like we haven't really had a chance to discuss. And as I mentioned that we're thinking of tooling this towards finishing some of our own material, given that this space still exists, it's not like I'm tearing this down during the week or anything. It'd be nice to maybe hear from some people that are interested in a more, I guess, lower pressure kind of environment where we just say, we're not recording, we're not streaming, there's no broadcast, we're just trying to get together and jam and play music. So if there's interest in that, if you have any interest in that, please get a hold of me personally, or contact through the page, because I think I would like to schedule something like that and kind of maybe spearhead that if that's something that people are interested in. If not, that's fine too. But I just want to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that everyone who watches this knows that they're invited to participate as well. This isn't intended to be a spectator sport where you just root for your team and then when the game's over you turn the TV off. The intention is that there's something here that sparks you wanting to kind of add your input and see it move a direction you're interested in. So I think with that, unless there's anything else that anyone watching wants to add or ask about, we'll probably go ahead and call it there. So thank you for joining us. I'll probably do something more like this. I apologize I wasn't more prepared for this, but it just felt like the right day to do it, and being session 42 and all that, it just felt like the right call. So I'll probably start doing as well in addition to this. I may start doing a more concise video series that relates to kind of my workflow in production and what I'm busy with, and that might be a little bit more generic kind of content that caters more to the educational side of things, and maybe tries to help folks that are interested in doing some of this stuff on their own. I want to put those tools in your hands as well, because we've spent a year plus at this point, if you count all the planning and setup for this, just finding out what doesn't work. I mean, we've tried a lot of different things that frankly got bad results, and the evidence of that is clear. You can go back and watch 40 sessions plus worth of content, not all of which I'm super proud of, but that's fine. It all was a learning process that I'd like to, if possible, demystify for anybody who's interested in figuring that thing out for themselves. With the tools and technology that are available now, it couldn't be easier if you're willing to spend some time getting things set up and kind of refine whatever your workflow is or whatever you're trying to present. So if you're not already subscribed to Vibe Unit on YouTube or Twitch or any of our other places, please go ahead and do that. That really means a lot to us. There is pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, Patreon. I'm going to get in trouble if I forget something. But that's it at the moment, I believe. So if any of those things are services that you mess around with at all and you want to just show support to us, we really, really appreciate that. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it. I appreciate you all coming by and joining me today, even though things are a little bit different. We'll probably return to our usual kind of Sundays next week, so next Sunday. I believe we're going to do our standard Skylight this week, which we typically do on Tuesdays. So, again, if you have any interest in being involved in this, specifically with or without any sort of production going on. This space is available, and we would like to have people take advantage of this and enjoy this with me and with Mike and with everyone else who's been through and kind of been able to do that with us. So um, thank you for joining me, and I will see you all next week. Thanks for joining Vibe Unit today. Bye.